Well, hi there. Welcome everyone to the next episode of Keto Chat. This is Carol Freeman. I am the creator of the Fast Track to Keto Success program. I am here today. I'm so honored to be interviewing Dr. R.D. Dikeman. I have an official bio I'm even going to read on him too. So, U.S. theoretical physicist, Dr. R.D. Dikeman. And I'm going to ask you in a minute about what this theoretical physicist is. Why didn't they give you a real physicist degree? So R.D. Dikeman is producer of Dr. Richard Bernstein's Diabetes University, a series of free videos on YouTube on how best to manage diabetes. He's also co-founder of Type 1 Grit, an awesome Facebook group for folks aged between 1 to 81, following Dr. Bernstein's low-carb approach to achieving healthy, normal, non-diabetic blood sugars. Dr. Dikeman's son, David, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2013. Like most families, they were sent home with the type 1 diagnosis with a diet plan consisting of about 50% of the calories from carbohydrates.
Right.
The very thing that diabetics can't metabolize. So watching his son's blood sugars fluctuate wildly after near-death experience from ketoacidosis, diabetic ketoacidosis, no joke, was parent torture to the first degree. So we'll talk about this more in a minute too. So knowing next to nothing about nutrition or diabetes management, Dr. Dikeman and his family found an immediately implemented Dr. Bernstein's book, Diabetes Solution, and for 3 years now has attained normal blood sugars, A1Cs of 5.0% or less. And his son's growth is on track. Probably he's taller than average too. I've seen pictures of this kid. He's pretty amazing. And the family has seen a virtual elimination of hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, so low blood sugars, high blood sugars, diabetic ketoacidosis. For some reason, that's a mouthful for me this morning, and future diabetic complications. So hope is restored. Dr. Dikeman's Low Carb USA talk on how to avoid type 1 diabetes complications is, I'm going to link it below here for everyone. So, well, okay. What should we start with? So, I got to ask about this theoretical physicist, PhD. What is that about?
Oh, I studied physics at the University of, I did undergrad at Michigan, but I studied at University of Minnesota with, they brought some Russians over to start a theoretical physics institute during perestroika. And so when I graduated from Michigan, I went to go study theoretical physics with those guys.
So what is theoretical physics? How is that different than regular physics?
Oh, it's, there's experimental physics and theoretical physics. So I'm an equation writer. I don't do the experiments to test the equations.
Oh, okay. I got it. And so growing up living in Minnesota, Michigan, you had to go the polar opposite and move to Hawaii then?
After about 6 years in Minnesota, I always tell people Minnesota made Michigan look like the Bahamas.
Okay.
I got to travel a lot in graduate school. One of the places that I traveled was Hawaii, and like a lot of people, I kind of fell in love with it. So when I graduated, I moved to Hawaii, and I got a job. Things worked out. Yeah.
Nice. Well, you probably stand out there a little bit because you're about 6'5" or something, and pale skin guy, and
people. I'm easily recognizable compared to my Michigan days, no doubt.
Yeah. So you've been out in Hawaii for how long now then?
Well, it's been about 20 years. So
oh, wow. Okay.
Almost as Hawaiian as I am Michigan.
Okay. Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So you and your family have always been Hawaii. I'm assuming then, based on how old your kids are, you met your wife in Hawaii then.
Yeah. Shortly after I moved here, I met my wife. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. So tell us, you have 2 kids. What are their names? How old are they?
Dave is 12 and going to be 13 in a week or two. And Hayden is 10. And, like you said, Dave was diagnosed when he was 9. So in 2013 with type 1 diabetes. And, that's kind of like the demarcation point in my life where, we sort of fell into this low carb world and giving lectures and that sort of thing, working with Dr. Bernstein, right?
Yeah.
So Dave was diagnosed, and he was in severe DKA, and it's a pretty common story. He lost a lot of weight. He had flu-like symptoms, misdiagnosed by his doctors. They thought he was just sick and should actually they recommended that he drink a lot of milkshakes.
Oh,
right, so sad.
Yeah.
And he was in bad shape, and like all diabetic kids, if you don't catch it, they fall off the cliff, and they lose. Dave must have lost 10, 15 pounds. I don't think I've ever told this story, but when he was sick, we were watching. I said, "Well, just stay home because we'll watch March Madness." And so we just sit on the couch, and I was trying to feed him and get him better. And he had a lunch, and he's drinking and he's eating, so that's a good sign, right?
Yeah.
The problem is he wasn't producing insulin, so he's literally starving. The glucose can't get into his, the energy the nutrients can't get into his cells. So anyhow, he vomited on the couch, which is unusual. And I picked him up. He said, I said, "Oh, let's just take you in the shower, Dave, and we'll get you cleaned up." And I picked him up. He said he couldn't walk. He was so weak. And, this is like over a 3-day period or so, and it just getting worse and worse and worse. And I picked him up, and he was light as a feather. And I took him into the bathroom, and I helped him get his shirt off. And I looked at his body. It's the first time in a couple of days I had seen his body without any clothes on. And I almost just fell onto the floor, because I looked at him and I said, "You're dying. Not that you're dying, you're dead." I looked at him and I said, "That's it," inside. And I got him cleaned up, and I put him on the couch, and I called Roxanne, my wife, and I said, "Dave's going to die." And we took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, you got to give him milkshakes." And so, what do you're not, I'm not built to argue with doctors okay.
Yeah.
So we the next day we had to take him to the I called another doctor, and we said, "We got to get you some tests." So we did the tests, and the doctor called us right away, and she said, "Oh, your son's in DKA. You got to take him to the emergency room right away." So here's like the punchline. We take him to the emergency room, and it is packed with like 1 billion people. Oh my God, what a nightmare, right? Dave's dying, and we don't know what to do. Doctors say he's got diabetes, but I don't even know what diabetes is. I don't even know what it is. And despite all these people in line, when we sign in, the double doors open, and a team of people come out with the gurney, and they like literally have like the what do you call it? The bullhorn, basically. David Dikeman, where's David Dikeman? And my wife and I we're just in, this is like half an hour ago that we were told Dave has diabetes. We look at each other. It's like, oh my God, what is happening? And they took him in front of all these people. Anyway, that's the diagnosis story. And you get an infusion of fluids and insulin, and it basically barely saved his life. Yeah.
Wow. And just a matter of days and
hours. Yeah.
So looking back, like, is there any advice you'd have for other parents that, maybe, are there some signs they could look for where early on they could just ask for some other tests, or is there anything, now that you could have even seen it earlier, knowing what you know now? Or
there's a campaign called Test One Drop, because this happens to kids and they die.
Yeah.
And Dave was, I think, hours away from being one of those kids. If I showed you a picture, it's gruesome what he looks like. Gruesome. And we missed it, but it happened so fast.
Right.
Anyway, the Test One Drop is a simple blood sugar test at his pediatrician. If she would have looked at him and looked at his body and said, "This is not right, let's test a drop," you would have seen his blood sugar would have probably been a gazillion, way above.
Yeah.
And then that would have been, and that test cost nothing.
Right, right. Yeah.
If you see another, a symptom is like frequent urination. That's because you're above the renal threshold and you're constantly peeing out glucose and you're constantly thirsty. That's a big sign for parents to know. Yeah.
Does that come on like a week or two or months before, the place where you're in the hospital, or?
Yeah, I think what we know is that the autoimmune attack happens over maybe a period of a year or more in stages. So you gradually lose the ability to produce enough insulin to get over the hill and bring down meals down to normal levels until eventually there's, like I said earlier, you go off the cliff and you can't stop it at all. And that's, if you're lucky, you can catch it early enough where you don't have to go through what we went through. Yeah.
What a remarkable story. And I'm so glad that he's okay now. And that, you're the person that you are, that you're so impassioned about getting the word out about how to prevent other people from getting as close as Dave did to a terrible story, but also just helping people live with, the quality of life that Dave is going to have because of you. And then all these other people that you're impacting is just, it's such an amazing journey that you're on. And I wonder if we could set the stage first, though, because I imagine some people watching this are going to have no idea what type 1 diabetes is compared to type 2. So can you just share like the basics of what that is?
Right. Type 1 and type 2 are both, there's differences and similarities. So both conditions ultimately result in high blood sugars, which are what cause the complications of diabetes. So, the complications are the same. You have these microvascular complications, and there's over 100 complications from high blood sugars. The origins of the diseases are different. Type 1 is an autoimmune disease. So we don't know how to provoke the attack. In the first place, we don't know what provokes the attack, and we don't know how to stop the autoimmune attack. Type 2 is a disease. It's called a lifestyle disease, but that's debatable. There's probably genetic susceptibility. There may be an autoimmune component. It's very complicated what happens in type 2 diabetes. The goal with both of them, back to the similarities, the goal with both of them is to normalize blood sugars to avoid the complications. And the only way to do that with both of the diseases is through diet. And you have to go for a low carb diet. Otherwise it's impossible.
Yeah, and one of the primary difference between the two is that in type 1, the pancreas is making almost nothing or no insulin, which is what the body uses to control blood sugars normally. And then in a type 2, typically they're overproducing insulin because they've been ingesting too many carbohydrates for what their body can tolerate. And but they both end up resulting in uncontrolled blood sugars, but more so in a type 1. So type 2 generally has high blood sugars predominantly. They don't run the risk so much of having too low. One of the things that most people have no understanding of is that with type 1s, following the conventional approach, they're real danger frequently, multiple times a day, of having too low of blood sugar. So So I'm curious then, can you walk us through, like in the beginning, the dietary approach that you were giving and what that was like for home life? And
Right. So the first part of the story was typical and somewhat gruesome and very sad. But the bad news is that once they stabilized, there's another wave of attack that occurs from the medical community. So the first wave is typically a misdiagnosis. The second wave, and that's well known. The second wave, unfortunately, is not so well known, and that is when you recover, you are typically met by a dietitian and or endocrinologist who puts you on a diet consisting of about 50% roughly carbohydrate. This is very analogous to a situation that could occur with someone with a peanut allergy who would report to a doctor that they are allergic to peanuts and be put on a diet of 50% in peanuts.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yes, it's so true.
Right. So this happened to Dave, and sure enough, we returned home. By the way, I give Dave a lot of credit, because when the doctor was explaining to us the basics of insulin and blood sugar management, the statement was, here's your blood sugar. When you eat carbohydrate, it'll go up, and when you take insulin, it'll come down. And the goal is to keep it between, 200 and 100 or whatever was spoken. And Dave was smart enough to say, and of course he said, the doctor was actually he was very forthright, and I appreciate that. He told Dave, if you're too high all the time, everything, amputation, blindness, this is what happens to diabetics. So you have to make sure. So he was very cool and honest, which I appreciated. And then too low, of course, and you're going to have a hypoglycemic seizure. So it's a balancing act. Mm-hmm. And Dave was smart enough to say, I just want to eat carbohydrate then. And I laughed, I remember like looking at him like, Dave, let me take care of that. You don't know what you're talking about because you're only a little kid.
Yeah.
You need to eat carbohydrate.
A 9-year-old can figure this out, but most of us.
He was right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we returned home, and I force fed him oatmeal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because that's good carbs. Is that why? Or.
Hey, I thought it wasn't just any oatmeal. It was the steel cut oatmeal.
Right.
Right. And that was on the list of good. Bananas were on the list, I totally blew it. And I was just following orders. So I like everybody else who knows anything about food. Right. So everyone thinks that, carbohydrate is important, blah, blah, blah. So we just falling into the same trap. I ate bowls of cereal and skim milk my whole life to, make sure that I wasn't eating too much eggs and all this nonsense, right? So it's the bad news is for type 1 diabetics is they get balled up into this low fat madness that we've been put through for 3 decades, which has resulted in epic levels of obesity and type 2 diabetes and metabolic disorders. And who goes down the tubes first? The type 1 kids who are lumped into this nonsense. They experience, if we would have kept on that path, then we would have had problems way down the line in our 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. The kids get sent down the tubes right away. The complications start happening right away. And it's pointless. There's no reason for it. Of course, you shouldn't be put on a diet of carbohydrate. You can see what happens the first time you eat it. The first time Dave ate his oatmeal, his blood sugar went up to 350. And I said, well, I'll just give him more insulin and I'll give it a little earlier. It doesn't work like that. You can never control it. So.
Yeah. Well, and that I've talked to, other parents of, with kids of type 1, and, they believe what the doctors told them, that, the doctor must know what they're talking about. And they'll say, well, my kid can eat whatever they want as long as we cover it with insulin. That's the phrase that they teach you, right? What's the fallacy about this? Like, just cover it with insulin.
The doctors know nothing about nutrition. So, I tell people asking a doctor, it's like asking the travel agent to fly the plane. Doctors, clearly they have, the average A1C for a type 1 diabetic kid is about 8%, which is a blood sugar of around 200. And that's, normal kids run in the 70s and low 80s, mm-hmm. Diabetic kids. So you're looking at a strategy which results in blood sugars triple normal. So it's a disqualifier for following standard advice. The diet, like I said, the complications come on fast. So the strategy that's being pushed so heavily by the professional diabetes associations and the endocrinologists doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And we now know that, I'll give you an example of what happens. The ADA journals just published this year a study showing that children following the standard advice and achieving blood sugars which are in the standard guidelines have brain matter differentiation from non-diabetics and IQ drops. So you're getting kids following this advice. Their doctors are bullying them into eating tons of carbohydrate, and for the reason of brain development. And the research shows that the hyperglycemia is causing the brain damage. So
yeah,
it's an unbelievable. It's a horrible situation what's being done to these kids.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
Well, I'm thinking now that likely that this misalignment of advice that's being given out is based on two false ideas or myths about it. One is that, well, we need carbs and they're healthy foods, so that's why we need to incorporate them. And then the other one I think that a lot of parents fall into is that, well, I don't want my kid to feel deprived. I don't want them to feel like they're missing out. What do you think about, we can dismiss we need carbs and all the healthy foods. Do you have a quick dismissal of that myth?
I mean, if you let your child eat carbohydrate, your blood sugars are around 8%. Your kid is guaranteed to get complications. If you study the literature, or look at this diet doctor video that you talked about earlier, that I go through all the research. So the agony and shortened lifespan is and like I said, the brain damage. You're going to have to include those into your strategy. If you think that you're going to deprive your kid, but not face any consequences from diabetes, you're sadly mistaken. Diabetes is the real deal. So you better not lie to yourself, because look, all I can tell you is it's not going to happen on my watch. This is not a strategy we're going to pursue. Now, the good news is that there need be no deprivation when you're eating a low carbohydrate diet. There's no recipe that exists that can't be made arguably better eating a low carbohydrate food. And the amount of hassle that's required to go manage your blood sugar up and down all day long, save your kid from dying by giving him a juice box. Now he goes rocketing back up to 300 or 400. Then he comes rocketing back down, versus the small variations you can achieve with healthy food. So the deprivation argument is really sort of bogus.
Right.
And then as far as the complex carbs are quote unquote healthy, all you're really doing with this diet, the Bernstein diet, is you're taking the grains and the starches and the sugars and the super sweet fruits like bananas and apples, and you're jettisoning them. Get rid of them. But you're replacing those foods. You're replacing them with healthy protein foods and fibrous vegetables. So you're going to get all your phytonutrients. You're going to get lots of protein for your kid, and you're going to get normal blood sugars. So on the one hand, here's your choices. You get normal blood sugars, lots of protein, lots of veggies, and occasional delicious low-carb snacks, so there's no deprivation. On the other hand, you're going to eat all the foods that cause type 2 diabetes and obesity. And the non-diabetic community, those are going to be your choices for your diabetic child. We can't eat those rapid acting carbohydrates with a functioning pancreas. You're going to give those to a kid with a needle and a syringe and say, go ahead and keep your blood sugars normal. They're going to eat all this junk. Their blood sugars are going to be wild. There's no extra nutrition in grains that you can, grains are fortified. They're so nutritionless that you can't get from it. So those are your choices. And God only knows, well, we do know actually why, but this is the choice. This choice is almost universally pushed by the diabetic associations and doctors. If you do this choice, you might end up getting bullied by your doctor to eat more unhealthy food. So the world is so bizarre. Every day I see examples of how bizarre this situation is.
It is, and even for parents of that have kids of normal functioning pancreas, non-diabetic children, the whole argument of, well, I don't, they're young, I don't want to miss out, I don't want them to feel like they're being deprived or anything like that. People need to wake up and realize the poison that they're giving their children. And, the one hand is just nutritionally poor. You're setting the stage for lifelong disease, chronic disease, diabetes, heart disease, all these things, right? You're setting it early. And not to mention the brain chemistry that goes on with these highly refined sugary things. Like, no parent out there in their right mind would say like, well, I want my kid to have a little heroin every day because I don't want them to feel like they're missing out like all the other kids get to have heroin. There's nobody that would say that, but it's the same brain chemistry of addiction, and we're parents are lying to themselves by thinking that they're doing their kids a favor by letting them have these foods. So we need to change the way the parents look at what they feed their kids. I argue that you should care more about what you feed your children. They should get even more healthy foods than you're worried about you're feeding yourself, because they're growing. They're setting the stage for the rest of their life, for the way their cells are going to work and the genes and all that. And I think it's even more important that we feed kids nutritious foods than even, grandma.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
You're hitting the nail on the head. We know that the child obesity is through the roof. We know that child type 2 diabetes is growing at in record proportion. So again, this is look what's happening to these kids who have a functioning pancreas. Now you're telling the type 1 kids to go eat the same thing. Right.
Because they don't want to miss out either. You don't want to miss out on all these diabetes and heart disease, do you, kids?
Well, I tell you what, most parents have no idea what it feels like to have, and I don't either, hyperglycemia. These parents should be asking some adult type 1s instead of talking amongst themselves. They're little 4 and 5 and 6 year olds. They have no idea how miserable it feels to go from blood sugars of 50 to 400 and back down again for a crappy piece of grocery store sheet cake on somebody's birthday. So
yeah. I personal experience. I dated a guy with type 1, and I have a master's degree in nutrition, and I didn't know what type 1 was like until I got up close and personal with this guy. And he was, I was feeding him low carb meals, but he was still using insulin like he wasn't having a low carb meal, unfortunately, or, he adjusted at what he thought was appropriate, and it was still too much for the meal that I fed him. And he ended up experiencing, a low, and I can tell you I was scared to death that he was going to die right there. And me having a low carb household, I had nothing on hand that I could give him to bring his blood sugars up. And he didn't know as well as what you know now about how to manage that. And so, here I am, he's at 45 blood glucose, laying in my bed like delirious. And I'm driving to Safeway to buy a Coke and a Snickers for him to try to save his life, to literally try to save his life. And it is so scary. And people have no clue. And even most healthcare professionals really have no clue how scary that is. And that's what we're the life that we are, but the healthcare professionals are leading type 1s to lead. And it's not right. Not right.
There's 2 things you hit on there that going back to the type 2, type 1 differences. Type 1 has a bit of terror to it that the type 2 doesn't have, a non-insulin using type 2. Type 1, your blood sugar can go to 0 if you manage your insulins wrong. And that is very scary. And if you're a type 1 diabetic, you're going to experience lows. There's really no way around it. But what you're going to try to do is minimize how low you go and how fast you go low and how frequent you go low. And to do those things, you need to use predictable doses of insulin. And we haven't started talking about Bernstein yet, but that's basically his whole mantra, is that when you eat low carb, it's not just the low carb that gets you the normal blood sugars, it's also the proper use of insulin. And the magic is that when you eat low carb, you use small, predictable doses of insulin. So what's going to happen when you use small, predictable doses is you're going to experience less severe hypoglycemia. It would be very rare if I got a call from my son at school and he said, or the nurse said, "Hey, we found David almost passed out." What happens when you eat low carb and you take insulins, which are longer lasting to cover protein foods, is instead of experiencing this high carb, rapid acting insulin roller coaster, you gradually might go up or you gradually might go down. And because the peaks and valleys are so mild, you'll, with disciplined amount of testing blood sugars, you're able to catch any hypoglycemia. And you're also able to treat any hypoglycemia with a little bit of glucose. So Dave will carry a couple of glucose tabs. Let's see, I should have some around. Not on the table. They're about this big. They're about the size of a quarter. And if he feels himself going low, he'll check his blood sugar and he'll take a glucose tab. But he doesn't get into a situation where he's trying to save his own life, down into the 20s or 30s. So right there's your number one benefit of low carb, is that your kid isn't going to be under the threat of death from severe or seizure at school from eating a piece of grocery store sheet cake and covering it with 10 units of insulin.
Yeah.
You're not going to do that. So
Right.
You're not going to undergo these wild excursions, and they're scary. Yeah. Like your example is scary.
Yeah. And it's until you've been through it, it's hard to understand what it's like to see somebody you love and care about laying there. Yeah.
It's scary. Yeah.
So how did you find Dr. Bernstein's book?
While I was being stupid with the steel cut oatmeal, I'm also the scientist, right? Mm-hmm. So I was trying to, and I was working with some other scientists who didn't know what they were talking about either, who had some type 1 relationships. And the goal for me was, if I measured out Dave's oatmeal, or the example I always use is he likes Starbucks chocolate chip cookies, which are about 60 grams of carbs. If I just measured it out, and I measured out the insulin, and I gave him the insulin at the right time, then I figured I could get his blood sugar to be flat, because I'm smart. And so I actually was writing computer modeling programs to do all this stuff, and modeling what his glucose would be and measure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was doing that for a month like a fool. And, yeah. And my wife was kind of watching me do this, and she's like, well, she knows I'm a smart guy and all that kind of stuff. But, when it would work, I'd go, hey, I got it, and then we'd try it again and it wouldn't work. He'd go low, or the next time he'd go way up high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's like, this is stupid what you're doing. So she ended up she was Googling and she bought the Bernstein book. And when I read that Bernstein book, I was flipping through it. I got it in the mail. And there's a section on what I was describing earlier, the law of small numbers, which says if you use small doses of insulin, you're going to get predictable results. And I knew it was right because I had seen it in my models that diabetes is diabetes on a high carb diet will give a stochastic blood sugar, which is a random blood sugar. And I knew it. And then you flip through the table of contents and I said, we got it. This is the right answer. We started implementing it, and right off the bat, the blood sugars got normal. And then we learned how to manage insulin a little bit better. There's so much to it. There's so much architecture to really getting your blood sugars nailed. The low carb, he will tell you that it's not just the low carb. Low carb might be, it's, first of all, you have to do it. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
But, you still have to learn how to manage the insulin. There's a lot you got to learn. So it's, it's kind of an art, and you have to study him, and he's got the answer to everything. The thing is, I'm of the predisposition that I want to figure something out new. I want to do something new and different. I don't want to listen to there's got to be something that he missed.
Yeah.
I cannot find, every time I deviate from what he does, life, gets a little harder. You may still be able to get the normal blood sugars, but he has really got it down to a science, and he's a scientist too. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think that anything that we haven't said is that Dr. Bernstein is 81 years old, living with type 1. What age was he diagnosed?
I think at the age of 12.
Okay, so he's had his whole life to figure this out.
Yeah, maybe 10 or something like that. I don't want to get that wrong, but yeah, I mean, since he was a little guy, yeah, he's had it, and he almost died of kidney disease. So, back then there weren't much different types of insulin. There was really no strategy other than to prevent death.
Yeah.
But he got a hold of the first commercial blood sugar meter. Now, it was only available to doctors, but his wife was a doctor, and he was in bad shape. He had been on this blood sugar roller coaster for many years, and his kidney disease was, end stage, and he got a blood sugar meter and just dug out of the dirt a diet and insulin management strategy that gave him normal blood sugars, and he stuck to it, and his complications all started healing. He had gastroparesis, which is when your vagus nerve gets paralyzed. He had this kidney disease.
He reversed his kidney disease?
He did, yeah.
That's exciting.
And his neuropathy. So.
Oh, yeah. And neuropathies are usually things that take quite a while. They take several years to really heal, but and for most people, it's not reversible.
Yeah, the toughest is the gastroparesis is a neuropathy, and that takes maybe a decade. I think it took his took a decade.
Okay.
Reliable digestion. So there's a lot of things I think that he learned from his own experience, and he wrote a paper on it. And because he wasn't a physician, he was just an engineer in his 40s.
Oh, okay.
He couldn't get it published, so he said, "Well, I have to go to medical school then." I think he was like 42 or 43. So he went to medical school.
Wow.
Yeah, became a physician, opened his own practice. We worked in a diabetic wound clinic for decades under a very famous German diabetologist, and he's 82 now, and he's still seeing patients, and the mind is like a young physicist's mind. He's really an incredible guy.
Yeah, that's great. The gastroparesis, I was experiencing that after the severe inflammation after the car accident that I went through, and so that's a pretty miserable thing to experience. It's just basically you're really hungry, you're constantly hungry, but the food won't digest and move through your digestive tract, so you're full and starving at the same time, and you just want you want to feel satisfied. You want to feel like you're getting the food to move through. But yeah, that's a hard one. And so he had a long journey to heal that. So I'm glad that I had a short experience of that. So as quick as I got on a ketogenic diet and got my inflammation to drop really quickly, that reversed for me. So,
right.
But who knows how long I could have got stuck with that had I not found this one I did. So, my next question then is about, so you found this book and you started implementing it. Did you do it family-wide? Did you just say, we're all going to do this together? Or did you at first, make separate stuff or?
Oh, we did it family-wide. Yeah. Of course I wanted to experience, what whatever Dave was going to do, I was going to do. I'm not going to, eat a bowl of, Cheerios and say, well, you can't have that, Dave. So we're eating the same thing. And wife is eating the same thing too. And, you talked about it earlier, the carbohydrate addiction. When I started going cold turkey on I'll be damned. I always thought, oh, there's no addiction. I used to walk by the Starbucks pastry cabinet when I was getting my coffee because I like Starbucks. So I get Americanos, but I would always get those cookies too because Dave and I both liked them. And I'll be damned. I was like, not only were my hands kind of shaking a little, I would have like this conversation like a crazy person in my head. Well, it's just one cookie and you've eaten before and you just worked out and you do feel a little like you might need some energy. So maybe, actually it's probably a good thing that you eat the cookie. I couldn't believe
I'll just get it and hide it from Dave and go eat it in the bathroom, right? When he's not watching.
Yeah, well, that thought kind of would stop me in my tracks.
Okay.
That would feel wrong. It is, for me, it was easier because that was my stopgap. It wasn't me arguing with myself. I always had I always felt, because I was very convinced I had done enough research at that time to realize that Dave was in for some hell if he didn't find a way out of this mess. So that to me that's a trump card that overcame all that nonsense. So I never did cheat, and I haven't cheated for 3 years. I mean, like Dr. B and I don't cheat, man. Because
high five to no cheating. I'm on that bandwagon. So.
But you don't even have to. I mean, we still have the chocolate chip cookie now. It's made out of almond flour. It's just not wheatgrass. So
yeah, did you try the keto cookie at the Low Carb USA, right? Like.
Yeah, the keto cookies are great. So you don't need to eat that junk anyway. So
yeah.
But you do. It is good. It is addictive. It is.
Yes. Yeah.
You got to go cold turkey, and you never want to add back the carbohydrate. So I see people struggling with this. I didn't struggle much once I got over it, but once people start adding it back, it's just not the way to go. And that's why we don't cheat in the family. We don't have like, oh, Dave, it's Thanksgiving. So, go for it. Right. And we'll just cover it. It won't hurt you one time. We just don't do it. It's stupid. Right.
Yeah.
Do it, so.
No. And I can imagine he has zero desire as well, because he knows how that makes him feel.
Well, when you get started, it's natural to kind of test the boundaries. So in school, when he got started, he was diagnosed in March. We were low carb by August, something like that. And then he went back to school. And then in school, they'd have like popcorn. So he would try like a small 8-ounce cup full of popcorn. So literally like a handful. And what would happen? His blood sugar would go so high, and he'd spend the rest of the day working with me on the phone to get it back down. So, is it really worth it to have, 5 minutes of popcorn and spend 4 hours? And he's always been very analytic about, what the blood sugars are going to do to him in the long term. So that's a motivator for him. Mm-hmm. So anyway, after a few things like that, it was kind of like, so he doesn't cheat either, which is, I thank my lucky stars because it's a nightmare.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what have you noticed in your own health and your own body as you've adopted this way of eating in support of your son?
Well, I lost a lot of weight. I mean, I was like 260 pounds at my max, and a kind of a disaster.
Well, and you were working out at that weight, right? Like you were.
I belonged to a gym. I went to the gym. I would do a spin class. I would lift weights. So it wasn't like I was sedentary. I was a big golfer, so I was always outside. But you can't overcome the bad diet. It's totally true. And then when you get on the good diet and you really get it nailed, it's like I was telling someone today, it's like the weights lift themselves, right? You have so much energy if you get everything nailed down. So, I mean, I feel better now than I have ever felt in my life. And I'm almost 50 years old, and I'm stronger. I have more endurance, and that makes a real difference in your attitude towards life. You feel, I'm so happy, right? My kid has type 1 diabetes, life-threatening, 24/7. I got to get up all night and make sure his blood sugars are good. But I got to tell you, I never have been happier because, overcoming it and dealing with it and beating it and being on his team and being a part of all that and just feeling better, is put a silver lining on this bad situation. So,
yeah.
I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have had this situation and continued down that road of being fat and over carbohydrated and not feeling healthy, because you feel terrible all the time too. So you feel depressed. I need the energy to deal with this situation, and I need the positive vibrations to deal with this situation and to overcome it, because it's a lot of work,
Yeah. Well, good for you. Yeah. And I just, I love hearing stories of people that, they're faced with whatever health challenge, and then they just look at it like, I just need to figure this out. I still have the power within me to overcome this. I'm not a victim of my diagnosis. I'm not a victim to my genetics, my environment. I can figure this out. I can be really healthy. And then when you do, you feel better than you ever have.
Right. It's tough. I think the information's getting out, but it's tough to come across the information. Social media has been a real blessing. See, I'll tell you another part of the story. It wasn't just Bernstein. And it was also that when I was in social media initially, I got on these parent forums, and it was very scary to hear the daily stories of what was happening to these kids. But I did stumble across a few success stories. One is a guy named Ryan Attar. And Ryan was a former Army captain, and he was following the Bernstein protocol. He was doing CrossFit. His blood sugars and A1C were good. And I thought, hey, why don't we try to find people who are actually type 1 diabetics and having success? And I started to meet all these people across social media. And they were inspiring, like you're saying, they were inspiring. And they're all doing the same thing. They're all restricting their carbohydrate. They're all exercising. They all know this Bernstein book. They're following it to, pretty close to 100%. Some tiny differences around the edges. But everyone's pretty much doing the same thing. And that was a really powerful moment too. So I kind of got away from the parent forums and got more interested in networking with the actual adult diabetics who were overcoming the limitations of the disease and learned how to get normal blood sugars. And man, I learned so fast from these people because, like I said, there's so many tricks involved.
Yeah.
And that was an awesome experience. And now I've got all these, very close friends on a day-to-day basis that I talk to. So, yeah.
Nice. So I wonder, what are your, one other question I have too is then compare and contrast Dr. Bernstein's low carb approach to like a ketogenic approach. Is it, I know it's pretty similar, but it's going to be different. Like your goal is not ketosis for what you guys are doing, right?
Right. That's a great question. Right. So a few things. Okay. First of all, because you go back to Dave, the original Dave story when Dave was in DKA. So the word ketone is, it's going to strike fear into the hearts of both parents and doctors. Okay. But there's a huge difference between ketones and ketoacidosis. And the difference is that ketoacidosis requires a zeroing out of insulin on board and high blood sugars, subsequent high blood sugars. So ketones themselves are not poisonous. They're metabolites of fat. So when you're metabolizing fat in your body for energy, you might see some ketones. Now, so the real The real thing you have to worry about is the ketoacidosis as a diabetic. And by avoiding high blood sugars as your goal, then you're going to be okay. So on a low carb diet, Dave is very rarely above, let's say, 130 milligrams per deciliter. So if he is, we're aware of it, and he gets insulin. If you're on a high carbohydrate diet, your blood sugar is always so high, maybe up in the 300 or 400s at times, that you're not sure whether you have insulin or not. So a typical DKA situation might be like a type 1 diabetic eats a piece of cake. And then they might forget to take their insulin, or their pump might break, and they go to sleep. They go to sleep, they're not getting insulin, their blood sugar rises, their body starves from glucose, then their body starts producing ketones because there's no energy getting into the cells. Now you have high glucose and high ketones and no insulin. Your body starts reacting to the dual dehydration complex of high blood sugar and high ketones. You get dehydrated and you enter DKA. The way to avoid that is to keep your blood sugars normal. So if you look at the statistics, people who have type 1s who have very normal blood sugars, A1Cs in the low 5s, have much lower incidence of going into DKA than people with high blood sugars. So it really is the high carb approach that ends up causing the most DKA. Now, putting that aside, what about this low carb and ketone thing? Is Bernstein's diet ketogenic or not? Bernstein would say that the goal of his diet isn't ketones, okay? The goal of a type 1 diabetic, the importance of keeping normal blood sugars is so paramount and of such an overriding difficulty as far as your hour-to-hour demands, that seeking out ketones for some other reason is really something that is sort of inconsequential in comparison, right? Mm-hmm. So his diet he doesn't care about ketones. He cares about normal blood sugars. And for kids, the ketogenic diet in kids, like kids that have epilepsy, is generally a high-fat diet. The Bernstein approach is to push lots of protein for kids for proper growth. So what I track is blood sugar, and I track, well, he eats enough vegetables, so I don't worry about that. I do track protein, though, in grams per day. And I don't even really measure ketones, because if he has ketones, it means that he's metabolizing some of the dietary fat that he ate. Like if he eats some eggs, or if he has a heavy cream and whey shake, he might make some ketones, which means he's metabolizing the fat. But he's in no worry of DKA because his blood sugars are normal. So that's kind of the long.
Yeah.
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 So
very cool. Yeah.
Is it a ketogenic diet? You might produce ketones from time to time, but certainly not that it's not the goal, and it's not something that has to be, measured at all. There's nothing in the book about you need to measure ketones twice a day, shoot for ketones of 2 millimoles or something like that. It's irrelevant to the approach. Yeah.
Well, and I can imagine with the focus on protein, adequate protein, higher protein, that helps stimulate appetite as well. Because I know one of the challenges that parents have with a traditional ketogenic diet for kids with epilepsy is that the really high fat diet suppresses appetite a little bit. And so I can imagine, I've seen pictures of your son. He's tall, he's handsome, he's healthy. And you shared that he's in normal growth range. So I can only imagine that the way that you're feeding him, he doesn't have a problem with not being hungry.
No, it's not a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, when you offer up a heavy cream shake, I'm sure there's like, yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is interesting to think about, like, what kind of a meal does what does a day's worth of meals look like for Dave? And basically, I tell people they're pretty much the same as a non-diabetic. We just use different ingredients. So he has waffles or pancakes for breakfast, but we use almond flour and all these tricky recipes that I'm sure you're totally well aware of. that are out there. And people are starting to get aware that you don't have to use wheat to make
Yeah.
things, right? So, we had these cheddar biscuits. I think they're a Maria Emmerich recipe. I mean, you cannot believe how good the food can be.
Yeah, we live in a just a wonderful time. Like even 5 years ago, the creative, low carb cooking it really wasn't out there. And I'm not quite sure what happened. Maybe it's just the whole focus on foodies and all the cooking shows, and people started getting a little more creative with these low carb recipes. But you're right, there's a plethora of them. I always tell people that, whatever you love before, your high carb favorites, there is a low carb keto friendly version of that. I always jokingly say the only thing that we haven't mastered yet is craft beer. There's no low carb version of craft beer yet, but I bet that there's 10 people right now in their garage working on that. So I'm sure not too long and we'll have these low carb craft beers, and then we can say truly that there is everything, every version. And Dave, before Dave's 21, there'll be that version for him too.
Yeah, you nailed it on the beer. I don't drink beer anymore. I drink red wine and coffee. Yeah. No more pale ales.
Yes, but that was one of the ones that I gave up as well. But for how good I feel, I'm not missing it at all. So, okay. So
No.
Go ahead. Well, at least one more question for you. So, what is your vision? Do you have like a kind of a goal or a vision of what you want, the approach to type 1, when kids get a diagnosis of that, like what do you see as a future? What would you like to be the way that the world works?
Well, it's sort of criminal that the parents, you can't underestimate, the degree at which parents are essentially, I would say nearly, but it actually is, they're bullied into feeding their kids unhealthy foods that result in diabetic complications. So there's a guideline issue. You have pharma-funded professional diabetes associations issuing guidelines that doctors have to follow or feel are correct and are misinformed. And there's, there are numerous instances that I know where these guidelines are nearly enforced on these poor kids. So what needs to be done is there needs to be recognition that this whole system is totally wrong, and that a low carb approach to managing diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and removing the threat of complications and all the insulin management ideas behind doing that, they need to be taught by the doctors. The doctors have no idea how to control diabetes, and they need to learn how to control it. They're spending their many years becoming endocrinologists and physicians. It shouldn't be so hard for them to engage in a little bit of thinking so that they're not sending these diabetic children down the tubes, from the moment that they're diagnosed. That's what I want to change. Yeah. And I don't know how to change it. I teach as many people as I can what we're doing, and you can give people the link to the book.
Yeah.
If they start following the book, then they have success. So.
Yeah. Well, and those of you who are watching this now, share this, because what percentage of kids or the population has type 1? What are we talking about?
I forget. It's not a huge number.
Yeah. Well, so those of you who are watching this, I bet there's somebody that that is affected by type 1. So share this video. We can get the word out. I think, this reminds me of, you remember Tony Martinez that talked at Low Carb USA, one of the last speakers that was there, where he talked about, so he's a lawyer, and he talked about kind of the problem with an approach that's been the predominant approach bureaucratically. It's really hard to get them to say, oops, sorry, we were telling you the wrong thing. And so it ends up being, you know, a groundswell effort that has to be from, you know, the patient, the consumer up. And so I think the work that we're doing with, you know, sharing stories and success stories and the community that you have on your Facebook group, Type 1 Grit, and the video series that you're doing with Dr. Bernstein, like these are all the things that we have to do to, you know, empower parents and empower people living with this disease to do something different. And you can have that control, and it doesn't have to be as hard a way of life. You can have an amazing quality of life. And your son, he's playing basketball and sports, and he's just a normal kid, right?
He's playing basketball and sports at normal blood sugars.
Yeah.
You know? So you don't have to look at your kid like it's this. I can't imagine going through my day-to-day life looking at my kid like, well, you know, it's just have to reorient my thinking about his future, and you know, he's caught a bad break. There's actually something that you can do about it. But why wouldn't you do something about it? You know, I say to the parents, why wouldn't you do something about it? You know, and they say, oh, well, how do you are a bully to your son. You're going to control everything that goes into his mouth. And if you have a 13-year-old, I tell us, there's no way that I can control what goes on. I say goodbye to Dave at 6 a.m. and I pick him up at 6 p.m. every day. So that's 12 hours that he's awake, that he can do whatever he wants. Yeah. But I tell him, I cannot control you, but I can control myself. And I will never eat the foods like grains and starch and sugars and fruits that will hurt you. And I think that makes a big difference to set the example. Especially, I blew it on the oatmeal, so I have to make up for that. So yeah.
Well,
and he sees the difference that it makes, you know, with me. So
yeah.
So far, so good.
Well, I applaud you. You were a model father and family leader, and
thanks.
I shared with you after you spoke at Low Carb USA, just how touching the work you were. Of all the speakers that were there, like you made me tear up with what you're doing, because it's just, it's, you know, it's kids, right? Like, I mean, it's adults too, but it's kids. Like, you know, this is important stuff. Like, adults can make their own decisions about what they put in their body, but,
exactly.
You know, kids don't know any better. They don't know any better. So, so just in closing, is there anything else that you were hoping I would ask or that you wanted to talk about?
Well, that's a tough one. We covered so much ground. I mean, I would just, you know, there's a couple of good resources, you know, Diabetes University on YouTube. There's the book Diabetes Solution, and that book is like a reference guide. I mean, it has everything in it that you could possibly need to know about type 1. But some of the videos are really geared towards initial contact with type 1 diabetes. And I think they're really helpful. When we made the videos, I said to myself, there's a couple of videos where I interviewed Bernstein. I said, what would I want to know if I could redo this from the get-go? And that would, you know, if only someone would have told me. So that's what I try to achieve with some of those interviews with him, is to help the newly diagnosed parents before they get into this rut of riding this roller coaster all day long in the name of eating steel-cut oatmeals and juices and all that nonsense.
Yeah, and not missing out on the Starbucks cookies, right?
Yeah, right. So there's all the mythology that you have to fight, you know, just to put a sway, you know, that these parents are being told by their doctors to go down this, and they, of course, everybody trusts the doctors and they think that they know what they're talking about, but in this case they don't.
Right. Yeah, so we'll put links to all those below here as well. And so my closing question, I think I stole this from, like, you know, podcast, might have been Dave Asprey or something like that I stole, but I'm going to ask a double. So usually I ask like, if you knew today was your last day on earth, what would be your final meal? But I'll ask too, if you know what Dave's would be as well. Like, I'd be curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would Dave's meal be? You know, I don't know. That's a good one. Dave's a big steak guy. and he likes, he likes the most expensive steak. He likes the filet mignons, right? So I get a lot of those. So I know that would be on the menu.
Okay.
Now, what does he like for dessert? Okay, I get the dessert. Here's the low carb dessert recipe to check out. Carolyn Ketchum's site, All Day I Dream About Food. She has a Boston cream poke cake, and that's.
Oh, I saw that showing up around. I think you posted you made a pudding or the banana cream pie out of that. Yeah. Okay, I saw that.
Yes. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, that is. So Roxanne made one of those Sunday, and 3/4 of it is gone, and I ate very little of it. So that is a good one. So that would probably be it: steak and poke cake.
Okay. How about you too, or what would you have?
I'd be happy eating that too, but I would tell you that even on my last day, I am still not eating carbohydrate. And if they was eating it and the nuclear bombs were going off in the background, I'd still look at him and go, dude, I beat you, man. So we would not go for it. I don't think he would go for it. He's stubborn, right? So
that's one of the things I love about this question is that it shows people that even, this isn't like a torturous diet. People aren't doing this feeling deprived and they can't wait till the day that they can have whatever crap again. It's like they just enjoy the food so much that even on their last day, they're still going to have, that same food. So I love that.
Yeah, no oatmeal not on the menu anymore.
Yeah. So I hear my son is here, so I'm going to invite him in so you can say hi to my son. But
okay, cool. That's great.
Kendall, come here. I'm talking to Dr. Dikeman in Hawaii right now. So come say hi.
How's it going?
This is my little child.
Hey, how old are you?
21.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So he's just over a year keto, and he's had some really amazing health benefits. Clear skin,
good for you.
Relief of anxiety, depression. He's tons of energy. He's getting straight A's in college now, and it's good.
It's a miracle drug.
It is. I agree with you, Kendall.
Yeah.
He just got back from picking up heavy cream from the store after his day at college. So
that's funny. See this list right here? It's like heavy cream is on the list.
And butter too. Nice.
Butter, bacon bits.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go. I know you probably got some work to do out there, like go play golf or something in Hawaii. And
yeah. No, I got to shop. I got to get food for the week.
Yeah.
I'm trying to avoid Costco tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Food,
That's probably a good idea. So, yeah.
It was fun talking to you.
Yeah, I thank you so much. Like, this has been such a joy and pleasure. And for those of you watching, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Please share it. We want to spread the word that there's really an awesome way for all these people to live. So.